Welcome to the Plotcast. I'm your host, Char from the Plottery. I'll help you plant little but mighty seeds of motivation so you can watch your ideas grow into beautiful, beautiful novels. Welcome back to the Plotcast. I'm joined today by Allie Nava. Her debut novel, July and Everything After, has just recently come out, and it tells the story of an American woman's transformation after experiencing horrific events during a visit to her birth country in Asia at the inception of civil war. We are going to be touching on subjects of genocide and anti-minority movements, so if this is a difficult topic for you, feel free to sit this one out and stay safe. Allie, thanks so much for being here. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Char, first of all. Really glad to be here and talk to you and share some thoughts with your audience. My name is Allie Nava. I'm the author of July and Everything After. It is a book that very much uses an overlooked part of history in South Asia, which is a civil war that took place in a small country called Sri Lanka next to India, uses that as a vessel really to explore ideas around finding purpose in life and ideas around positive psychology in many ways. And certainly hope that the themes in the book are things that can be helpful to people that end up reading the book.
You mentioned positive psychology. Can you kind of expand a little bit on that and what you mean by it?
Yeah, it's this idea around understanding oneself and the world around oneself, and focusing on ways to find meaning and purpose in life, and using that journey to really come to a state of, happiness and peace. There's a lot of nonfiction books, of course, on the topic, and there's a lot of ancient philosophies like Stoic philosophy, Aristotle's philosophy, Buddhism, Vedanta, that in essence talk about a lot of the same concepts that are found in positive psychology. But I thought it would be interesting to sort of explore those concepts in a fictitious story, and so it's sort of looking at, how do you arrive at this purposeful, meaningful, peaceful point in your life after having gone through something so traumatic. And I'm hoping the story sort of resonates with people as a universal story, because, many people go through different experiences that are challenging or traumatic, and they want to come out on the other side of those experiences with the positive mental state and with the feeling of, I've learned a lot from this, and, here are the things I can maybe do better to live my life better. And that's sort of what I mean by positive psychology.
Okay, I really like that. I think that's really important to apply to anybody who's maybe gone through any traumatic experience. And yeah, I think writing is a really lovely way to reflect on some of those things. But yeah, so you were there during the war, am I right?
No, in fact, I was a small child during the beginning of the
Okay.
war. I myself was unfortunately targeted in the 1977 massacres, where a lot of people were murdered. And honestly, I was very lucky to survive. There's a lot of people that were sort of helpful in that endeavor. I was a small child myself at that time, but I learned a lot from that experience, and it sort of gave me an interesting lens through which to view, then after 1977, when the war broke out in 1983, an interesting lens through which to view all the things that were going on. And yes, I had been back there in 1981, right before the war broke out, and soon after the burning of the library and so forth. But I used a lot of research and a lot of first person interviews to really get as authentic a perspective on what was going on at that time in 1983.
Who did you speak to get these characters out on paper? Who did you um, draw inspiration, so to speak, for these stories and plots inside the actual novel?
Yeah, I have been inspired by a lot of people over the last several decades that I've come across who have either been through the war or escaped from the war, came over to this country as refugees, either to, often it's to Canada in this part of the world. I have spoken to relatives that have been through some of these traumatic experiences. And then I did a lot of research. There are a lot of great articles and journalism and books around the topic, you know, BBC, um, a number of Sciences Po, a number of other resources that I kind of reference in the book, at the end of the book. Um, and I think the interviews sort of give me those very raw perspectives and emotional perspectives around what does it really feel like to go through these experiences, both in the moment as well as after the moment, and maybe what is your life like leading up to the moment. And I certainly thought about my own life in that moment in 1977 and thereafter, and sort of the consequences of the war and the things that were happening. Um, but I would say, yeah, there's a lot of inspiration that comes from talking to the people who've actually been through these experiences. But also, there's a lot of inspiration that comes from other countries that have gone through similar experiences and trying to understand, whether it be Eastern Europe or the Middle East or Africa or other parts of Asia. Unfortunately, very unfortunately, civil war and genocide are things that happen in too many countries. And it doesn't take too much to search for information about these types of experiences in many places all over the world.
Yeah, unfortunately. But I do like what you mentioned about having, like, getting that raw emotion from actually speaking to a real human person. And I think that's really important because I often get asked, how do you research a certain thing if you were not present or if it's, not something that you're an expert on? And I do think it's so important to just speak to people who know that, because I do think, like, you can get articles and you can get, watch documentaries and things like that, but actually talking to people who have been through something that you are trying to write about, I think just gives it always that edge of authenticity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had relatives that went back during the war, and the stories that I've heard, the crazy things that they had to go through. Um, you just can't, honestly, you can't find that information in articles or sometimes even in books. You can really only find that information by speaking to somebody that has experienced these things firsthand. And I feel very fortunate to have had those conversations with people who have gone through some of these very crazy, unexpected types of experiences. It really gave me a lot of insight as I was writing the book. And of course, I draw from my own, perspectives around having been through certain things related to, what happened in 1977 as well. But yeah, I mean, yes, I am very inspired by sort of the authentic stories and conversations with people.
Do you think that having written this book and actually put the words down on paper, do you think that it's helped you sort of process some of these experiences? I don't know if you have memories as a kid, or do you think it's kind of helped you move on from this subject, or do you think it's something that you're still sort of passionate about and still researching and still living through?
That's a great question. I'm very passionate about sort of, these ancient wisdoms, these ancient philosophies that have influenced the idea of positive psychology or meaningful, purposeful living, or conscious living, maybe some people call it. And I find that, yes, when I have gone through challenging times in my own life, it is that wisdom that has sort of brought me to the other side. And as far as sort of the actual events that take place in the book, Yes, I mean, I've been writing, the book took me many years to write. I've sort of been having different thoughts about the events in the book and different characters in the book. And in many ways, I wrote it really as a tribute to the people that went through these experiences firsthand. And there's a lot of voices that I think get marginalized or suppressed, or they're just, overheard, or people that are maybe not necessarily telling their story, but these are stories worth telling and hearing about. And so I did feel, I don't know if the word is relief, but I felt really good about the idea that I could tell these stories. Whether it's in part my story, it's not an autobiographical book, but I do draw from experiences that I've had that are relevant for the book. But I'm so glad to be able to tell this story of the various experiences of all the different people that have gone on this journey. And so rather than feeling like a relief, I feel almost a sense of joy that the story can be out there and other people can learn from it and hopefully benefit or get something out of the story themselves for their own lives.
That's really nice. When you write about, obviously this is a very heavy topic, but when you write something like that, how do you, in the actual text, in the characters and in the plot, how do you come up with a balance of tragedy and sort of hope and resilience and inspiration? How do you build characters who show us that balance?
Yeah, no, I mean, you're so right that people need that balance because it's too hard to read something that is depressing.
Yeah.
And so I tried to build that balance in there. I mean, I mean, you're really bringing up such a great point because in the editing and revision process, which took a long time, it's something that I was very cognizant of and constantly trying to rejigger. But in many ways, the additional characters in the book, be it Kelsey or Sister Lucy, um, even Jace, I tried to bring some lightness to the story through those characters and through the interaction with those characters and through the perspectives and experiences that those characters bring to the story. And at the end of the day, like if you look at how the book ends, I don't want to fully give away the ending of the book, but it is a story of resilience, not just of the protagonist, but of so many people that the protagonist has interacted with, or maybe the silenced voices and the voices that we don't hear about as much. And so at the end of the day, it is a positive story. It's both reality and positivity sort of hand in hand in many ways.
Yeah, it's kind of how do you deal with the reality in a positive way, I think, at the end of the day. Um, a lot of my listeners are actually writers who want to sort of tell stories like yours, meaningful, impactful, maybe not on such huge topics, but even just smaller personal stories. But they want to make an impact. And I often get this question that I genuinely struggle to answer, and it's this idea of wanting to sort of look at a traumatic event or put your deepest wounds down on the page, but you're just absolutely terrified of it. So do you have any advice for writers who are maybe trying to tackle really heavy themes, but they might sort of feel overwhelmed?
Yes, because I did go through that thing. Yeah, I went through that line of thinking as well as a writer myself. I think here's what I would sort of share as an observation, having gone through that experience myself. I think it's good to start with putting everything down first, as tragic as something may seem in the moment around a particular trauma that a writer is exploring. I would put it all down. And then as you're writing the story, I would refer back to, all of these notes that you've kind of put down because I find that you don't have to introduce all these sort of tragic details in one go. You can kind of weave it into the story in different places in the story, and you can bring out the details even through multiple characters and conversations and experiences that all these different, other characters have. So in some ways, um, spacing out the information makes it feel a little bit less intense as well, and more easily digestible for a reader. And then the other thing is the revision process. So I find that having beta readers, having other people outside of your close circle, like in other words, it's good to show a couple of people maybe what you've written, but it's really also great to show the writing to people who don't know you, and who can really read it objectively. I was actually very lucky to be able to use somebody who had done editing work in Europe, on similar types of books. And wow, she gave me some amazing insights around, where information could be clarified or maybe made more intense or lighter or whatever it might be. So I would say the revision process is extremely helpful um, in this. And yeah, but I would say the bottom line, don't be afraid to write and put down the information you think, the message that needs to be said. And it almost leads to a second question, which is, what about the publishing industry? Because, the publishing industry goes through phases around what do they want to publish? What are they willing to publish? And this is where I think a writer has to ask themselves, are you looking to be traditionally published? Are you looking to self-publish? Are you looking to do something in between? Because the constraints on what you're writing can be different based on that. And at the end of the day, a publishing company wants to make money. They're in the business of making money, so they're trying to get a pulse on what people want to read. And that's where I think having a good editor is also helpful, because an editor usually has a familiarity with the market and what people want to read, what's appealing to read. And an editor can be really important in helping to revise pieces of the book so that there is both an appeal in the story and the impact, but also an ability to digest the information without it feeling like too intense in the case of a tragedy.
Yeah, no, I quite like that. I think a lot of my audience anyway are sometimes quite scared to express themselves and put those thoughts on the page. Probably because of actually the point that you brought up of the publishing market and the trends and things, because it does get a little bit terrifying to see, the kinds of books that are getting published and yours is not like them, or yours doesn't seem to have a place in them. And so it's a question of, do you sacrifice what you want to say for the sake of trends, or do you actually just write your heart out and put down the stuff that you want to say to the world? But yeah, I do think that's definitely a choice that every writer has to make for themselves. And you've made that choice. Are you indie publisher, right? Or
Yeah, I used a small indie publisher who I've been so impressed with. They really are they've sort of amassed a nice collection of really interesting, impactful books across a variety of genres. But it's interesting, like as a writer, you have to almost take a step back and ask yourself, well, why are you writing, and what is your goal? Because not everybody has the same goal, and not everybody writes for the same reason. Some people have a certain image of writing and what they want to get out of the publishing process, and for other people, it's sort of a side thing. Um, and and so I think each of the exploration of those questions might lead to a different conclusion for different people. And so I can see how, it would lead some people to say, well, yes, I'm going to be really authentic. I'm going to put it all down. And for others, there may be a concern around saying certain things, because we know from having read the news and seeing different movies that are out there, like American Fiction,
yeah.
sometimes what happens.
Yeah. We get those happy endings, and cheesy, structured films and books. And yeah, it's definitely a challenge to be in the publishing industry, especially right now. I think I've been speaking to some of my clients about that, but that's a huge topic. But to go back to your publishing, do you feel like this indie approach has given you more freedom to tell this book the way that you wanted to?
I don't know the answer to that question because I chose to go with an indie publisher for a different reason. That's a very hard question to answer because I think in many ways, a lot of publishing is very individually driven and personality driven. And so one person may have a certain relationship with an agent that's very different from another person's relationship with an agent. And meanwhile, there's, tons of these more indie publishers that you don't even need an agent. And each of them is looking for something different because they each have a different strategy that they're trying to pursue. And so it takes some time to kind of find where things may work for you as a writer. And yes, with some indie publishers, maybe there is a lot more freedom. I think but it depends on which publisher you're working with. Indie publishers are not like this monolithic group of people that are all looking for the same thing.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good answer, actually. That's a good point. It's a very varied industry wherever you look. I think it's also the same if you look at traditional publishing. Like I think different houses and different agents also have different priorities. So that's again, I guess we come back to the point of research and how important it is for an author, not just in the writing process, but also in the publishing process. So I had one more question. The Sri Lankan War is maybe something that might be unfamiliar to a lot of readers and listeners 50 years after. And you mentioned like it's quite a niche topic. How did you approach writing this in a way that makes it also accessible to a modern audience, but still sort of pays homage to the historical sort of significance?
Yeah, no, you're right, because it's so important to make sure the story is engaging and appealing and relevant and even desirable to a reader. What I tried to do is really to me, this is an American story, because the majority of the book takes place in the Western world. And it's this exploration of an American citizen's experience with exploring aspects of her heritage and culture that are maybe very shocking, and weaving that back into trying to be an American, really. So the idea of the Sri Lankan War is, yes, that part of it may feel a little bit nichey, but at the end of the day, if you look at, whether you're an American or Canadian, a North American in general, North America is the home of immigrants. At some point, everybody came from somewhere else, except for Native North Americans.
Yeah.
And so what I was trying to do was make the story relatable through this idea that, okay, here's an American experience, but it's a more recent immigrant as opposed to somebody who immigrated 100 years ago. And here's these experiences that the character goes through, whether it's the challenge of straddling multiple cultures, or this idea of feeling insignificant, or the idea of assimilation, adapting to a new place. And also the idea of like, how do you get to that point of peace and happiness and purpose, which is a very universal human concept. So I tried to make things more universal from that point of view. And then the other thing, of course, is because it is a North American experience that also draws on experiences in other countries like Sri Lanka and India. Part of the book also takes place in India as well. I tried to bring in different characters from different parts of the world and different parts of America that with, different backgrounds to sort of try to make that story more universal. And it is such a American thing, a North American thing to have a diverse group of friends. You can be an Irish immigrant and you come here and you're friends with people that immigrated from other countries. Italy, India, Mexico, whatever it might be. And we are really just this very diverse country. North America being very diverse. Europe as well is so diverse now. Everywhere, every time I travel to different cities in Europe, there is an amalgamation of backgrounds, and it makes things very interesting. So that's really how I tried to make it universal. So the idea of the Sri Lankan War, that's really, that's a little bit at the beginning of the book. It's a way to introduce a trauma and a struggle, but at the end of the day, it is a story of an American who's trying to contend with these terrible experiences and get to a point uh, where she can move on and live a peaceful and productive life.
Yeah, I think a lot of historical books that I've read recently do that kind of trick where they have a character that's sort of grounded in the present, or they do two storylines. So one of them's in the present, one of them's in the past, and you kind of mix it in a little bit so that the modern audience still kind of finds something that's a little bit more relatable. I think this also really works really well with novels that are kind of like yours, kind of niche and different from maybe something that a typical reader who would pick up your book would read, so that they still kind of feel like, yeah, I can connect to this. I can connect to this character. I understand their story, and I've also learned something new, which is always good. But yeah, now that this book is out, what is next for you? Are you working on another project? And if you are, how are you sort of approaching it after having such an emotional weight on this first one?
Yeah, so I have a lot of events coming up that are spread out throughout sort of the next even 9 months, I would say, which is kind of nice. So we started in September with some private events and some public events, and we are continuing with a mixture of a number of public events at bookstores and book fairs and things like that, as well as some private events that people are holding, some online events as well. And it's spread out, you're in the industry. It's spread out because certain book fairs only take place at certain times of the year, or it might be once a year, and so it's hard to sort of go out and talk about your book all in sort of just that 1 month that the book is released. So that's sort of one important thing, is I'm trying to make invitations to come and talk about the book, or maybe present the book, or do a book signing. There's been some really nice bookstores across the country that have decided to carry the book, and I sometimes go to those places and do a signing. So that's one thing. The second thing is, yes, I am working on another book. I had already started it a while ago, but that I'm enjoying that process as well, and that will be part of my next step as well. But I do also spend a lot of time, working with other organizations that advocate for various causes, be it sort of the arts arena, or I have organizations that I've historically worked with a lot of organizations that work on issues related to women and education and economic empowerment for women. And that's something I'm really passionate about and will continue to work on as well.
All right, I love that. Is there anything you can tease about your next book?
Probably, yeah, no, I haven't sort of put together that one-liner just yet, because
Yeah.
it's like super early days, but it'll be, I think, it's going to be a much more universal story. There'll probably be some similarities to the prior genre, in that, there'll be some action and adventure like this one. There'll be some potentially metaphysical aspects like this one as well. It will probably be very female driven like this one as well. So there'll be some similar things, but it'll be a very different story, and perhaps less of an international one this time around.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much. Yeah, if you want to pick up Allie Nava's book, July and Everything After, I think you can get it anywhere that you can get books.
Yes.
And Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Allie. It was really nice to get to know you and talk to you.
Well, great. Yes, thank you so much, Char, for your time and your generous invitation. And I appreciate being able to talk to you and talk to your audience as well.
Thanks for listening to the Plotcast. If you want more writing tips and tricks, head over to my YouTube channel. Until next time.